The room was already tense before a single question was even asked. Cameras were rolling, lawmakers were flipping through thick stacks of documents. And directly behind the witness table sat a group of people who had waited years for this moment. Survivors connected to the global trafficking scandal surrounding Jeffrey Epstein were seated quietly in the background, watching every second. And then one member of Congress leaned forward and delivered a line that immediately changed the tone of the entire hearing. He looked directly at Attorney General Pam Bondi and said something that echoed across the chamber. "Justice for the people, you've got to listen to the victims, like the women seated behind you today. Those are just some of the hundreds of survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's global sex trafficking ring who are demanding that the truth be told and are demanding accountability for the abusers who trafficked and raped them. You still haven't met with these survivors, so with their permission, let me introduce to you the survivors and late survivors' family members who are present today. There's Teresa Helm, there's Jess Michaels, Laura Blue McGee, Danny Benski, Liz Stein, Marina Lera, Sky, and Amanda Roberts, who are the family of the late Virginia Giuffre, Charlene Richard, and Lisa Phillips. Now, you're not showing a lot of interest in the victims, Madam Attorney General, whether it's Epstein's human trafficking ring or the homicidal governmental violence against citizens in Minneapolis. As Attorney General, you're siding with the perpetrators and you're ignoring the victims. That will be your legacy, unless you act quickly to change course. You're running a massive Epstein cover-up right out of the Department of Justice. You've been ordered by subpoena and by Congress to turn over 6 million documents, photographs, and videos in the Epstein files, but you've turned over only 3 million. You say you're not turning over the other 3 million because they're somehow duplicative, but we know that there are actual memos of victim statements in there. And you also took down the Department of Justice's prosecution memo from 2019. So it's clearly not all duplicative. But even if it were, why not release it? Just release all the duplicative stuff. In the half you did produce, you redacted the names of abusers, enablers, accomplices, and co-conspirators, apparently to spare them embarrassment and disgrace, which is the exact opposite of what the law ordered you to do. Even worse, you shockingly failed to redact many of the victims' names, which is what you were ordered to do by Congress. Some of the victims had come forward publicly, but many had not. Many had kept their torment private, even from family and friends. But you published their names, their identities, their images on thousands of pages for the world to see. So you ignored the law, and even with over 100,000 employees at your disposal, you acted with some mixture of staggering incompetence, cold indifference, and jaded cruelty towards more than 1,000 victims raped, abused, and trafficked. This performance screams cover-up. Convicted sex trafficker and groomer Ghislaine Maxwell opened the gates of hell to Virginia Giuffre and hundreds of other victims, as Virginia recorded in her remarkable book, Nobody's Girl. But when Maxwell was subpoenaed to come testify before Congress, you and Todd Blanch quickly moved her from a higher security prison to a minimum security camp in Texas, where she's enjoyed 5-star treatment, including catered meals, private gym time, and access to a therapy puppy. All because Todd Blanch, who's utterly failed to investigate the monstrous crimes of Epstein and Maxwell's co-conspirator, spent 9 hours with Maxwell and satisfied himself that she would have nothing unordered to say about Donald Trump, which is your only real interest in the matter based on institutional performance. But abandoning victims and coddling perpetrators is what you do best when the FBI opened a criminal investigation into the brutal killing in Minneapolis of Renee Good, a poet and 37-year-old mother of 3, by Trump's masked paramilitary ICE agents. You shut it down. You claim you're investigating the cold-blooded murder of Alex Prey, an ICU nurse at the VA. But how can we trust the administration when the President and Kristi Noem call Freddie a domestic terrorist and Stephen Miller called him a would-be assassin? Not only do you refuse to share evidence with the state and local investigators and prosecutors in Minnesota, you have blocked their access to the crime scene and the evidence. How are you seeking justice for Marimar Martinez, the Montessori school teacher in Chicago who was shot 5 times by a Border Patrol agent who bragged about it on text? Or the family of Keith Porter, a father of 2, shot and killed by an off-duty IICE agent in L.A.? Or the family of Sylio Viegas Gonzalez, shot and killed in Illinois minutes after he dropped his kids off at school. There's no sign of any movement at the Department of Justice. You even launched a criminal investigation into Renee Good's grieving widow. How sick is that? But it's even worse. You've turned the People's Department of Justice into Trump's instrument of revenge. Trump orders up prosecutions like pizza, and you deliver every time. He tells you to go after James Comey, Letitia James, Lisa Cook, and Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve Board, and members of Congress like Adam Schiff, Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, Chrissy Houlihan, Jason Crow, Chris Duzio, and Maggie Goodlander, to name a few, and you snap to it. You replace real prosecutors with counterfeit stooges who robotically do the president's bidding. Nothing in American history comes close to this complete corruption of the justice function and contamination of federal law enforcement. And the good news is many serious lawyers at DOJ, including some of your own original employees, have refused your lawless orders. Danielle Sassoon, your original pick for acting U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, resigned rather than follow your corrupt order to quash an indictment against Mayor Eric Adams as a political favor from Donald Trump. A Federalist Society member who clerked for Justice Scalia, U.S. Attorney, refused to participate in this blatantly corrupt scheme. Her top assistant, Hagan Scotten, an Iraqi war vet and two-time Bronze Star recipient who clerked for Chief Justice Roberts and then Judge Kavanaugh, promptly resigned too, writing to your office, quote, "I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion. But it was never going to be me." You and the President nominated Eric Siebert, a 15-year career prosecutor, to be your U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. But after 5 months of investigating Letitia James and James Comey, he found no evidence to justify criminal charges. So you forced him out. You replaced him with Lindsay Halligan, Trump's personal lawyer from the Mar-a-Lago documents case, who had zero prosecutorial experience and no qualifications. And then you were humiliated when a federal judge found that this corrupt appointment was blatantly unlawful and threw out Halligan's indictments entirely. And grand juries of American citizens have repeatedly rejected your vendettas and baseless indictments brought by the hacks left at DOJ. Now, with 2 different grand juries in Virginia voting down indictments against Letitia James in a single week. And just yesterday, another grand jury shut down your vendetta factory by rejecting indictments against the 6 members of Congress who had spoken out to remind all service members that they have a duty to refuse illegal orders. You tried to get a grand jury to indict 6 members of Congress who are veterans of our armed forces on charges of seditious conspiracy simply for exercising their First Amendment rights. I hope you will heed the wisdom and the constitutional patriotism of those grand jurors and not try it again by doubling down on that humiliation as your best lawyers are sacked for having participated in the January 6th case. Or just flee for the exits. Now your new lawyers keep lying in court. In dozens of cases, they've been excoriated for lying to federal judges. Chief Judge Boosberg, right here in D.C., suggested your Department of Justice perpetrated a fraud on the court. Other judges found your statements to be, quote, inexplicably misleading, patently incredible, totally inconsistent, and so disingenuous that the court is left with little confidence that the government can be trusted to tell the truth about anything. Now, as ranking member, I asked the chairman to add a few extra rounds of questions today, because we each have 5 hours of questions, not 5 minutes, but we're stuck with 5 minutes. That's clearly insufficient to give voice to America's victims and survivors and to demand answers about all the corruption and cover-ups that we see at DOJ right now. We've got just 1 round. So, we ask you politely but firmly, Madam Attorney General, please do not waste 1 second of our precious time by evading questions, by changing the subject or engaging in personal attacks against members of Congress. We saw your performance in the Senate, and we're not going to accept that. This isn't a game. In the Senate, you brought something with you called a burn book, a binder of smears to attack members personally for doing the people's work of oversight. Please set the burn book aside and answer our questions. And when you hear us reclaim our time, that means it's time for you to stop speaking. We only have 5 minutes, so when we reclaim our time, that means you stop. And if you don't, we will ask the chair to stop the clock and let you go on his time. The quality of justice in America depends on the character of our government. Please do your job and bring the Department of Justice. Your job is justice, and your clients are the American people. But if justice truly belongs to the people, he argued, then the victims sitting behind her deserved answers. The tension in the room shifted instantly. What had started as a routine oversight hearing suddenly turned into a confrontation about one of the most disturbing criminal networks in modern history. The lawmaker began listing names, survivors, family members, and advocates connected to the Epstein case. One by one, he introduced them into the congressional record. Each name represented a story that had been hidden, ignored, or delayed for years. Some of the victims had spoken publicly before, but others had kept their experiences private, even from their own families. Yet now they were sitting in the same room as the nation's top law enforcement official, waiting to see whether their voices would finally matter. But the next accusation stunned even experienced observers of congressional hearings. The lawmaker claimed that despite years of investigations, despite countless headlines and court filings, the Attorney General had still not met with many of the victims connected to the Epstein case. That single claim sparked a wave of murmurs throughout the room. Cameras quickly zoomed toward the back rows where the survivors sat, quietly listening, and then the questioning moved into far more explosive territory. According to statements made during the hearing, lawmakers alleged that the Department of Justice had handled key documents from the Epstein investigation in ways that raised serious concerns. The controversy centered around thousands of pages of materials tied to the case, records that lawmakers said were partially released but heavily redacted. Critics in the hearing claimed that names of alleged abusers and enablers were removed from those documents. While some victims' information had not been properly hidden, if true, they argued that would be the exact opposite of what Congress had ordered when the files were prepared for release. The room grew quieter as the accusations continued. The lawmaker argued that even if some of the material had been repetitive or duplicated, it still should have been released in full. Transparency, he said, was the only way to restore trust after years of confusion surrounding Epstein's network. For many people watching the hearing, the controversy surrounding the files wasn't just about paperwork. It was about something much deeper. The Epstein case had always raised a disturbing question. How could one man build such a massive trafficking operation involving powerful figures across the world without someone noticing sooner? And that question still hasn't been fully answered. During the hearing, lawmakers pointed to the conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate, who was found guilty of helping recruit and groom victims. Maxwell's role in the operation had been central to prosecutors' case, but critics argued that the investigation had never fully explained who else might have been involved. Some observers have long speculated that Epstein's connections to wealthy and influential individuals complicated the investigation. Those claims remain the subject of ongoing debate, but the hearing showed that many lawmakers still believe crucial details have not been revealed. The tension escalated further when the conversation turned to how Maxwell herself had been treated while in federal custody. During the hearing, one lawmaker referenced reports about her prison transfer and conditions of confinement, suggesting that the situation raised additional questions. Online discussions about Maxwell's potential testimony have circulated for years, with rumors suggesting she might possess information about people connected to Epstein's network. However, none of those claims have been officially confirmed, and many remain speculation. Still, the mere possibility has kept public curiosity alive, and that curiosity has only grown stronger over time. But the hearing did not remain focused solely on Epstein. Soon, the questioning expanded into a much broader accusation that the Department of Justice itself had become deeply politicized. The lawmaker alleged that the administration had used federal investigations to target political opponents. Several high-profile figures were mentioned during the exchange, including former officials, state attorneys general, and members of Congress. Those accusations were presented as part of the lawmakers' argument that the Justice Department had lost its independence. Supporters of the administration strongly dispute those claims, saying investigations are based on evidence and legal standards rather than politics. Still, the hearing revealed just how divided Washington remains over the issue. And then the discussion took an even more dramatic turn. The lawmaker began describing what he called an internal revolt inside the Justice Department itself. According to statements made during the hearing, some career prosecutors had reportedly resisted certain legal strategies or decisions. The claim suggested that experienced attorneys inside the department had been uncomfortable with some of the cases being pursued. One example referenced during the hearing involved a prosecutor who allegedly refused to file a legal motion he believed was improper. According to the account presented, that refusal was followed by a resignation letter warning that someone else might eventually carry out the request. Those claims, like many others discussed during the hearing, remain disputed. But they added another layer of tension to an already explosive moment. For viewers watching the broadcast, the message was clear. The argument wasn't just about one investigation anymore. It had become a broader fight over the integrity of the entire justice system. And then came the discussion of courtroom setbacks. Lawmakers cited several cases in which federal judges had sharply criticized government filings or legal arguments. In some situations, judges reportedly questioned the accuracy of statements made by attorneys representing the government. Judicial criticism of legal filings is not unheard of, but when it happens repeatedly, it can become politically explosive. During the hearing, critics argued that those moments reflected deeper problems within the department's leadership. Supporters of the administration, however, say those courtroom disputes are being exaggerated for political purposes. Legal battles often involve intense disagreements, and judges sometimes push back against both sides. Still, the hearing continued to build toward one central point. For the survivors sitting in the room, the political arguments meant little compared to the simple question they had been asking for years. When will the full truth about Epstein's network be revealed? The lawmaker returned to that question near the end of his remarks. He reminded everyone in the room that more than 1,000 victims had been affected by Epstein's trafficking operation. Many had spent years fighting to be heard. For them, the issue was not political strategy or courtroom arguments, that it was accountability. The lawmaker concluded by urging the Attorney General to focus on the people behind the statistics, the victims whose lives had been permanently changed by the crimes tied to Epstein's network. He also warned that public trust in the justice system depends heavily on transparency. When powerful institutions appear to hide information or avoid difficult questions, confidence can quickly collapse. And that, he argued, was exactly what the country could not afford. And as the hearing wrapped up, the tension in the room had not faded. The survivors remained seated behind the witness table, watching quietly as lawmakers prepared for the next round of questioning. Their presence served as a reminder that beyond the politics, beyond the headlines. The Epstein case is ultimately about real people who endured unimaginable abuse. For years, investigators, journalists, and lawmakers have tried to piece together the full story of Epstein's operation. Some answers have emerged, but many questions remain. Who else knew about the trafficking network? How many powerful individuals were connected to it? And perhaps most importantly, will the full truth ever come out? Those questions continue to echo far beyond the walls of Congress. And judging by the intensity of this hearing, the fight to uncover those answers is far from